All right, let's bring John in as Eagles get ready to take on the Seahawks, Sunday Night Football. There's a lot going on in the NFL.
Wait, let him get his robe on first. Is this Johnny Mac on the back? Ain't sure.
No, on the back of your robe, McMullen, it says at JF McMullen, right?
No, he's right. It says Johnny Mac. But you can follow me on Twitter at JF McMullen.
You have the feathered robe today?
Well, you know, if you're Ric Flair, you always got 10 in the closet.
Yeah, I see John doing this hit today with a couple of bare-chested slap marks across his chest.
Nobody wants to see that. That's for sure.
All right, let's dive into this matchup a little bit. I want to start with the Eagles' offensive line and how good they've been this year going up against this Seahawks defense, the front seven. That is really where this game can be won or lost. That's the one way that potentially Seattle has an advantage. That front seven's pretty good. The Eagles' offensive line's really good, but that's the one spot where you look at them as having at least an equal to or an advantage in the game.
Yeah, I mean, and the Eagles are coming off not their best game from the offensive line, specifically the left side. The right side was rock solid. But I think, you know, when you talk about a 4-touchdown victory, generally you don't have many complaints. But you kind of heard Doug Peterson throughout the week. There was a tone that he wasn't happy with certain things. I think one of those things was that some of the things we worried about with Vaitai sort of came to fruition against the Bears, and Stefan Wisniewski was not that good as well. Now from Kelsey over, Brandon Brooks, Lane Johnson, they've been the best right side in football all season long. Kelsey's been, if not the best center, certainly amongst the top 2 or 3. But you do have a little bit of a concern with that left side, especially when you face a talented front like this.
You got that secondary that's not the same for them, and obviously you see some familiar faces over there with Byron Maxwell as a part of their secondary. Also Marcus Smith, by the way, for those of you wondering whatever happened to Marcus, he has migrated to the Pacific Northwest, which is where people migrate to, right? That's where you go. You go to the Pacific Northwest, learn how to climb.
And don't forget Matt Tobin. Matt Tobin is also a Seahawk.
Another cast off of the Philadelphia Eagles. But that secondary is a spot. Would you say that they're a weak spot, or is it just they're not as good, they're not as dominant because those guys are out, but they're still pretty good? Or is that a spot that, you know, in most weeks, if you look at a team that's missing that many starters in their secondary, you're saying, man, this team's really weak back there?
Yeah, well, I think it's a weakness. I mean, it's certainly weaker than it typically is when you have 3 potential all-pro players in a secondary, and that's what Seattle had for a very long time. Now you're down to Earl Thomas. Now, you can't say it's a complete weakness when he's back there because he's so good. He's one of the best free safeties to ever play this game. Forget about generations. He's that good. He's a Hall of Fame level player. And this is to me, it's a big eye discipline game for Carson Wentz, meaning he's got to be aware of that free safety. And they let Earl Thomas kind of roam the field because he's the type of guy that can read the quarterback and make plays. So you got to be very, very disciplined with your eye movement, try to look him up plays and things of that nature. But there's no question, without those other 2 guys, Richard Sherman, Cam Chancellor, it's not nearly as good as it usually is.
How's their pass rush, John, and who do you think Lane Johnson will have to neutralize?
Their pass rush is good. It's not nearly as good as it would be if Cliff Averill was there, who's sort of been one of those underrated pass rushers for years. Maybe doesn't make a big splash on the national scene, but you look up and he's always got double-digit sacks. Their biggest guys you probably have to worry about are Michael Bennett and Sheldon Richardson. And Bennett's one of those guys, sort of like Brandon Graham. He plays all over. He can play outside, he can play inside. So they'll try to match him up, probably more so, as I mentioned, with Wisniewski and Vaitai. But this isn't one of those games that Lane seems to have week after week this year, where he's facing great pass rushers. This isn't going to be one of those games for him.
And we talked with John Clayton in the last hour a little bit about Seattle and what they bring to the table. And I asked him, do they have any rushing attack to speak of? Is there anything other than number 3, the guy that lines up under center? Is there rushing attack?
Well, they have Eddie Lacy, and, he's probably more of a name than anything else right now. They've struggled to run the football. I think a lot of it has to do with the offensive line more than the actual backs. So they're not what they once were when you think about the original incarnation of this Seahawks sort of run where it was Marshawn Lynch, and that was their identity of offensive football, is they like to run the football first and then sort of have Russell make a few plays. Now it's the opposite, and things fall on his shoulders, and he's got to make it plays both in the running game and in the passing game. So, I said it yesterday on the show, if you give up a 30, 40-yard rush to Russell Wilson, well, it's not going to show up, obviously, in the running back category, but it still hurts. It's still 30, 40 yards rushing. But, yeah, I don't think they're going to sit back in an I formation and run for 100 yards against the best run defense in the NFL. I just don't see that happen.
How much of a factor do you think, the fact that Seattle's a home dog, and they haven't been a home dog, I think, since 2012, plus they do have playoffs to play for, they've got pride to play for, they have a pretty decent home record against the Eagles. How much do you think that plays a factor into, like, what Mike and I saw with Cleveland?
John Clayton said, he says it's enhanced the motivation clearly, that they know that they're a big underdog and they're not happy.
Yeah, John's there every day. Obviously, he's based in Seattle, so he knows better than me if he's in that locker room. But, when we talk about numbers and gambling, I don't get the sense most NFL players pay attention to that kind of stuff. So the fact that they're asked the question by the media again and again, so maybe they're aware of it from that standpoint. I don't think there's a ton of degenerate gamblers in the Seahawks locker room. I could be wrong. So from that standpoint, I don't think they care. I don't think they care about the number. The fact that they probably care about the fact that they no longer are viewed as this sort of indestructible giant at home, and that no one thinks they have a chance to win. But that comes to the fact that, hey, if Cam Chancellor was there, if Richard Sherman was there, maybe those guys would care about it, but they're not there. Those are the guys who built this legacy up. So I think that has a lot to do with it. And the reality is a 10-1 football team is coming in. So they've been in that kind of situation in the past a lot, and going on the road and being that kind of favorite. That's just what the NFL is. So personally, I think that kind of stuff is overblown.
About, I didn't realize this until I looked at the transcript from today's press conference. They were coming up on last year after the Seahawks game was when they made Nelson Agholor inactive for the next game. How much has Nelson Agholor improved from last year to this year? You get to benchmarks and you get to milestones. You think back where he was a year ago and where he is now.
Yeah, and it's almost exactly a calendar year. I wrote about that today on 973ESPN.com. It was November 20th of last year, so just a little over a year. That might have been the rock bottom of Nelson Agholor's career. That's when, remember, he had that penalty that wiped out the Zach Ertz, I think it was 57-yard touchdown, and he also, ran a great route. Just shook Richard Sherman in the middle of the field. Would have been a huge gain, and he just dropped the football. And afterwards, he sort of almost had a breakdown in the locker room. He said things were just eating at him and getting too big, and he was letting it get in his head. And that's when Doug sat him down for a game. And obviously, the improvement didn't start till the off season. And we've been talking about it. It's been a theme. And people, Mike will tell you, people didn't believe us. The reporters who were there every day, we would constantly tell you how impressive Nelson was, and nobody believed us. And then all of a sudden, the game showed up, and he continued to play well. And he's already got, obviously, career highs in receiving yards and touchdowns, and now he's an impactful player on this offense. He's He's not a great receiver. I don't think he's ever going to be a great receiver. But to come where he was and rock bottom to being a really, really effective player on such a good offense, it speaks to his work ethic, and he's finally gotten over the hump from a confidence standpoint.
And, John, if we're going to do the last year versus this year and go a year ago, the Eagles go to Seattle and they lose, and Doug Peterson was maybe a different coach. How much of a different coach is Doug Peterson now versus the Doug Peterson that coached that game?
Yeah, I think he's learned. I think all first-year coaches sort of go through a learning process, a learning on the job process. And he went through it, and he's become a better coach. But more importantly, the Eagles are a heck of a lot better football team this time than last time. And that's evident by the fact that, hey, they won 7 games last year. They already got 10 this year. So they're the best team in the NFL as we sit here and prepare for Sunday's game. So I think that has more to do with it than but Doug is a part of that, and we've talked about his game planning and his scripted plays and his ability to manipulate formations. He's done a very good job.
Mm-hmm. Doug was asked today about whether he was kind of looking at this game as kind of a GPS game. Like, does he need to see his team kind of how they stand up against a Seattle team, or is it, is he in that mindset of it doesn't matter who we're playing, or do they look at Seattle as maybe a step up in competition?
Well, certainly from last week, you look at it from that standpoint. Obviously, this is a much bigger test than the Chicago Bears, and we've talked about they've won 3 consecutive games by 28 points. They've won 4 by over 20 points. They've been beating people up in this, from that standpoint, going on the road against a pretty good team certainly is, it'll tell you a little bit more about the team than beating up an also-ran. So from that standpoint, but I think the Eagles just, as an organization, have tremendous confidence, and they should. And they think they're the better football team, and they expect to go in there and win the game. So if you want to call that a GPS game or what have you, I think people are looking at the reputation of the Seahawks and saying, well, this might be the changing of the guard at the top of the NFC, and perhaps it is.
Well, and the one thing with that, John, is there's not a lot of consistency in the NFL. Very few teams are always, Patriots, Steelers. Seattle's kind of been that team in the NFC that has been a perennial playoff team over the years. A lot of other divisions have changed, and you win the division one year, you fall to last, the next year you pop back up. Seattle's been pretty steady for 6 years.
Yeah, they've been very good. There's no question about it from that standpoint. But I think the people fueling that narrative, see, here's what's going to happen. If the Eagles lose this game, and it's a tough road game and a tough place to play, people are going to say, see, there's a step up in competition. If they win the game and they win it going away by 10, 14 points, they're going to say, well, there's no Richard Sherman, there's no Cam Chancellor, it's not really the Seahawks. So Doug knows that,
right.
and that's why I don't think it matters to him. But what matters to him is who's on the field on Sunday beating that team, and I think that's the approach you have to have. And the Eagles have been very focused on that this season.
Let's get into a quick couple NFL. We'll get John's pick for the game coming up in just a minute. We'll get a couple of NFL things here. Last night, Dallas wins, which holds off the Eagles' celebration. But did you see adjustments from Dallas to make you feel like they can stay in a wild card race?
No, I think they're behind the 8 ball. It was long, but mainly because of how difficult the NFC is as a whole. You think about all the teams ahead of them. However, the next couple of weeks, maybe things get shaken up because it seems like all the good teams in the NFC are facing each other over the next 2 weeks. So you have a lot of sort of obviously New Orleans, Carolina, Atlanta in the NFC South. The Vikings are playing the Falcons and Panthers, the Saints, We talked about the Eagles, obviously, against the Seahawks and the Rams. So there's a lot of tough games, and maybe you have to see somebody fall back. But all of those teams seem better equipped than the Dallas Cowboys. So I think it's going to be really, really difficult for them.
Other than maybe Chris Collinsworth was lobbying to be Kirk Cousins' agent last night, do you feel that we are seeing the end of the Kirk Cousins era in Washington?
Well, I think that's up to Kirk Cousins. Kirk doesn't need an agent. He's got a great agent. And he's going to make a lot of money. It's just a matter of what city it's in. I mean, he's a good quarterback, and I understand people talk about elite quarterbacks, and there's very few of those. And Kirk happens to probably be in that second tier, but we know what the cost of doing business is at that position in this league. So, hey, somebody's going to pay him a truckload of money, and he's made a truckload of money. He's bet on himself year after year with the franchise tag, and who knows? I mean, the Redskins might be so desperate they might put it on him again. I don't think so, because it's probably going to be cost prohibitive. But either way, they're going to work out a long-term deal, or he's going to have plenty of suitors. So he's going to be just fine. He doesn't need Chris Collins.
Well, he'll be fine. It's whether have the Redskins kick the can down the road enough to say, we're not paying $35 million or whatever long-term number we're going to have to pay you to be a 6-10, 7-9 team. We're not saying you're not good. We just know that you can't make us great.
Well, they could say that, but then you have to have the answer of who you're going to replace them with.
Well, everybody's chasing their tail on that.
Yeah, that's the issue. Are you going to get somebody better than Kirk Cousins? You know, that we've talked a lot about Eli Manning this week, and I think the way I described Eli in his prime, when he was an above-average quarterback, and people used to criticize him, is I used to say he's probably better than your quarterback, meaning if you're an NFL fan, you know, he was in the top half of starting quarterbacks in this league. Same thing with Kirk Cousins. That's how I describe him. He's probably better than your quarterback.
And that's the thing. This league is filled with the beef stew. There's so many quarterbacks that are in the ingredients. There's only 2, 3, maybe 5 at the most that are that guy that you really say, I wish that guy was mine. Everybody else, you're just kind of like, he's good, but because you always want better, exactly. But better doesn't really exist. There's only Brady. There's only Roethlisberger.
Say Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers, right? Brees,
and you can already put Carson Wentz in that conversation, and that's why the Eagles are in such good position, right. Not only for this season.
Russell
but
Wilson.
Moving forward for a lot of years.
Right. I mean, these are the guys that are teams constantly in the playoffs, although Brees' teams are not always playoff teams. But I guess you wouldn't be sad if he was your guy.
When he's on, he's on.
Right. But for the most part, those 5 guys there, you know, other than that, it's like, hey, you know, Kirk Cousins, he's good. Well, I don't want him. You can have him. You're not thrilled if he's yours.
And you made an excellent point with Brees, who was obviously a first ballot Hall of Famer who's won a Super Bowl, and he's, you know, been on teams that have been 7-9, 7-9, 7-9 for 3 consecutive seasons. Now they got it going back in the right direction because they have at least a much improved and capable defense, and now they're in the playoff hunt again. But even a guy like that, too often people say you talk about elite quarterbacks, and then there's the top tier, and those are the Tom Brady's of the world, and that's where I think ultimately Carson Wentz will be. Those guys can get you in the playoffs every single year by themselves practically. You know, I always said it with Peyton Manning. A bad season started with 10 wins. You were going to be 10-6, and then he kind of moved from there.
Yeah,
those kinds of quarterbacks, they are rare and very, very rare because Drew Brees isn't even in that category.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. Last one, we talked a lot about Eli this week, and as the week has gone on, there's been so many narratives. And there's a piece at Forbes that, ironically, we talked about before we saw this piece, but it kind of goes right down where we're talking, that the Giants have kind of created a tanking scenario here where, okay, we played our guy. We're not having a good season. We're 2-9. We really don't want to win any more games. It's not that they don't want to move on from Eli, but they don't want to win any more games.
Yeah, and they want to get the heir apparent. They want to get the next quarterback. They know it's time. And I think that's the proper decision. I really do.
Right. No, but the fact that they think that playing Geno Smith gives them a better chance to actually lose.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I think they're going to lose no matter who they play.
But they don't want to. They don't want to ass backwards themselves into any possible chance, and that Smith gives them the least chance to win.
It's possible, but ultimately, I always, I think Davis Webb probably even more so from that standpoint as a rookie, third-round pick, probably has no idea what he's doing at this point, considering where he played his college football. You're going to lose games with him, so I don't know if it's that. They're just having a bad year. I think it's more of, again, a desperate coach and a desperate general manager trying to say we still have something to offer. Mm-hmm. If you keep us around and we get a young quarterback, we can build this thing because we're going to have Odell Beckham back and healthy. This can turn around really quickly. I think it's more that than they're just trying to tank and get the best draft choice.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles and Seahawks, which way you leaning?
I'm not picking against the Eagles, not with that banged-up secondary. I have the Eagles winning this football game 27-17.
27-17. You're in. All right, man. Countdown to kickoff is Sunday night at 6 at the Rusty Nail in Cape May. They'll have plenty on this game between the Eagles and the Seattle Seahawks, and you can check out the show live. Thanks, pal.
Johnny Mac.
All right. Thank you, guys.